Well, thanks for having me, folks. So I want to, I'm just going to talk briefly. I got asked to talk about this Car-Free Vancouver Day project we've been working on. And I want to talk to you about it for, well, really actually for one specific reason I want to mention it. Because it's a small project, but I think it demonstrates something interesting, and I think it demonstrates something that I think might be of worthwhile interest to Cope. So the story goes like this. Was 2003, or 2004, one of those years, I was on the Grandview Woodlands Area Council. And it was, frankly, a moribund organization at that point. Despite a proud history, it really wasn't doing much. And we sat around and we started talking about what could be done. What could a residents council do that would matter? And we started talking about a festival. We started talking about maybe just having a festival like they have in every other part of the world, in towns and villages all over the world, where you close down the streets for a day or hopefully more, and merchants put their tables out and performers come out and kids can play and whatever. We started talking, throwing around ideas like that, and in time the idea morphed into something a little bit more political, which was that the idea of a community street festival is an interesting one, and it's a good one for celebrating community, but we wanted to infuse it with some kind of radical politics. And in the face of Gateway, one of the things that's most challenging for Grandview Woodlands, as you know, is the specter of a huge number of new cars pouring down 12th, pouring down First, pouring down Hastings, which will compromise our neighborhood drastically, which I don't have to tell you all about. But we decided to start a festival, and the first one was in 2005, and the festival was for two things, and I think they're interrelated, which is to celebrate the community, but also to explicitly oppose Gateway and talk about what an ecological future in our neighborhood might look like. And I think those two things are bound up with one another. And the sort of tagline we've been using, and I think it's appropriate, is less cars equal more community, and more community equal less cars. So I didn't know anything about putting on a festival, and frankly, none of the other folks that I gathered around knew much about it either. And so we just kind of proceeded, close down the street, asked people to come out, get some bands together, and it turned out about 25,000 people showed up the first year, which was a total surprise to us. And it was a fantastic day. It was great. It was wonderful, and it was wonderful not just in terms of its celebratory nature, everybody getting out and hanging around, but also because of, in some ways, just the example it set. There's something that happened to a lot of people, myself included, when the cars came back in the street and the neighborhood started filling up with 2,000-pound chunks of metal ripping up and down. Not only it became evident just how dangerous they were, but just what a pain in the ass it was. You couldn't walk across the street without looking cautiously. You couldn't talk to people on the other side of the street. People couldn't play soccer in the street anymore. And I think it provided some kind of example and some kind of way to think about what an ecological neighborhood might look in the future. So we did it again, and this was in 2006. We did it again, and in part because of it was right around World Cup time, and the Brazilians were already on the street. We didn't have to close anything down because it was right after the game. But something like 50,000 people showed up. It was a monster event. It was fantastic. I mean, I presume many have been there and seen it. It was a great time. It was a really great time. And it struck me and struck many other people that we were onto something. And I didn't really know why. I couldn't figure out exactly why, and I was just trying to think it through. I was like, well, why is it? Why are so many people coming out? Why is that? Why is it a good time? What's going on here exactly? But it struck me that the capacity to mobilize a whole lot of people was there in a way that I hadn't really experienced before, at least in my neighborhood. At that I'd never been part of an event that had 50,000 people come out for a full day. So we started thinking about it some more, and we started to try to think about how we could really use that energy and really use that momentum and really use that the mobilization that we were experiencing and the celebratory mobilization to try to do something, to try to infuse it further and to try to push it a little further. So this past year, 2007, we did it twice. And it should be said that this is virtually an entirely volunteer effort with about 300 volunteer performers, about 25 core organizers, and really a very tiny budget, a very, very tiny budget. So we did it twice this year, and despite the fact that it was raining and cold, a lot of people came out. There was still something like about 30,000 people came out to both events. And it was really, frankly, I know that this sounds cheesy or whatever, but it was really easy to do in a lot of ways. It was really easy, and more than that, it was a lot of fun. I don't really have a ton of interest in festivals, frankly speaking, but it was the organizing both before the festivals and between the festivals that really interested me. That is to say, we were able to get a whole lot of people willing to volunteer, willing to have a good time, willing to come together, and really willing to talk about ideas, but ideas that didn't seem dull. They didn't seem boring. They didn't seem plotting. it didn't seem calcified in the way that so much other ecological organizing in the past has seemed to me to be. So I was thinking about this, and I was trying to think about how we could take the idea of this and the energy behind Car-Free Vancouver Days and turn it into something broader and more important, because I think a lot of people would say, well, it's just something that happens over there on the drive, and it's a bunch of hippies kind of dancing out in the street and stuff, and whatever, and that's all good and fine. But kind of drawing on examples from places like Bogota in particular, but a whole number of cities all around the world, I started thinking about a Car-Free Vancouver Day. And the idea of drawing a circle around Vancouver and cutting out all the cars for a day is just, it's a huge pain in the ass, you know. I thought, oh my goodness, that's going to be a freaking nightmare to try to figure out all the logistics behind it and all that. And so I kind of disregarded the idea, because I thought, well, it's a good idea, but I don't see how that's actually going to happen. But then it struck me that if we did this on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis, we might have a shot at it. If we organize it, not as a great big centralized project, but if we organize it on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis, and rather than drawing a circle around the entire city and shutting it down, we just shut down neighborhood-by-neighborhood, maybe incrementally. So I started just kind of trolling the idea around. I started asking classes, I started asking friends, I started asking other activists around the city that I knew, and quickly we got 5 groups of other organizers in other neighborhoods that were real interested. And so about the past year, I've been kind of trolling the idea around, asking many of you folks actually. I've been asking folks, and many of you guys in this room, but people for advice, people for suggestions, people for, how could this look, how can we make this happen? And really very simply, and without a whole lot of hassle, 5 groups have come together. One on Main Street, one on Canby Street, one in Kitts, one downtown, and one on the Drive now. So we've got 5 groups. And the idea is that each one of those groups, working autonomously, but in collaboration with each other, will come together and organize a festival in their neighborhood at the same day, at the same time. The idea being we put those all together, and we're going to have 5 festivals in 2008. All of them, it turns out we end up doing them on Father's Day, which is the 3rd Sunday in June, but that's just by fluke, not by design. We have festivals at the same time in different neighborhoods all around the city. We do 5 this year, and then hopefully in 2009, presuming it works well, we'll add another 5, and pretty soon, bingo, we got ourselves a Car-Free Vancouver Day. The idea to me, like I say, is interesting, not particularly because of festivals, because frankly I'm not really interested in festivals. I think they're a good time and all that. But to me, it's the mobilizing potential, but more than that, it's the radically democratic tradition of organizing that interests me. I like the idea, and I like the name of this day or conference or whatever this is, A Vancouver 41, and I think that's great, but I think equally so, I think it has to be a Vancouver by everybody. And I think that if we wait for politicians to lead us, in all due respect to the fine folks in this room, if we wait for politicians to lead, we're going to be waiting a real long time for anything to get done. I think that if COPE is going to have relevancy and power and immediacy moving forward, I think we have to think about a radically democratic tradition that relies on everyday folks. And particularly in regards to this panel, I think if we're going to consider coming up with ideas and solutions for an ecological future, I think that future has to necessarily be an ethical future. And that is to say, it has to be one that draws in people, everyday people, working people, poor people, citizens of the city, in coming up with collaborative and collective answers to the profound ecological challenges that we face. I think if we wait for politicians, I think if we wait for the elites of the city to come up with fancy schemes for energy reduction or for energy gathering from alternative sources, that's all fine and good. But I think the only people that are capable of leading us towards an ecological future are everyday people. It has to be a radically democratic tradition that we have to draw on to come up with solutions that are community-based, that are based in everyday people's lives, and are driven and run by everyday people. And that's why I'm interested in the Drive Fest as it's expanded, as we're working toward a Car-Free Vancouver Day. Not particularly because I think a Car-Free Day is emancipatory in any fundamental sense. I think it's an interesting day, and I think it's an interesting project. But because of the tradition of organizing it represents and it's working within is what excites me. And the impulse and the energy and the joy with which I'm working with a whole number of people that are springing up in all parts of the city and want to organize a Car-Free Day is what really excites me and gets me interested. And I think maybe might have some kind of relevancy as COPE tries to piece together a transportation policy for the coming years. That's it. Thanks for having me.